Great. Speaking of students, I think it's finals week. I think they've been through the ringer. I see a few hearty souls, and if they've joined us on live stream, good for them. We're grateful to have them. Good morning. I'm Mark Hawks. I am the Dean of Graduate Studies. Welcome to Dakota State University. We are grateful to have Senator John Thune here and his team with us today. Thank you for coming. And of course, our charming leader, President Jose Marie Griffiths. She's here with us. We recognize a few of our dear friends. Regent Rave, President of South Dakota Board of Regents. Also Regent Frederick, who is here. President Sheila Jestring from University of South Dakota. Grateful to have their presence. State Senator Casey Crabtree, State Representative Reich, grateful to have them here. And then, of course, all of our friends, faculty, staff, alumni, and students who have joined us here today. And then our distinguished members of South Dakota's information industry and others, leaders in South Dakota's tech sectors. At this time, I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of the DSU talent who's helped us organize today the live streaming from dsu.edu, the hosting and the communications. Their contributions have truly been extraordinary. We live in an economy where network systems gather and store extraordinary amounts of data. But this aggregated data is a target for theft, fraud, and crimes, illustrated only a couple days ago when a leading healthcare firm announced that it had been victimized by attackers, and as many as a third of Americans' personal data had been swept up in a ransomware heist. I'm not sure that United Health had any DSU cybersecurity aces protecting their data, minimizing their risk, but their data was already at risk when it didn't have privacy practices that met appropriate standards. That's what Senator Thune has asked us to consider today. How can we best protect the consumer's personal information? What are the regulatory needs? What are best practices? So in organizing this roundtable, assist, and I'd like to, the first is Alex Sachin. Alex from Senator Thune's office, he is here. Alex, the pride and joy of Burke, South Dakota. He punches above his weight in all things computer science. I won't ask him to stand up. I would if he were in class, though. He's been super helpful. It's been good to have him aboard. From DSU, Professor of Cyber Leadership and Intelligence, Dr. David Kenley, who will introduce our experts shortly. But first, I've asked Dr. William Bendix, Associate Professor of Cyber Leadership and Intelligence, to take a few minutes and define what we mean by data privacy, what are its legal, ethical, and technical aspects. And then after our guests are introduced, we'll turn the time over to Senator Thune and President Griffiths. Today, I hope the discussion is one you'll find interesting and beneficial. Thank you. Bill.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hawks. Before things get underway, I have just a few brief remarks to make, which I hope will set up the discussion nicely and help everyone navigate this topic. Specifically, I want to clarify two terms that are central to today's roundtable discussion, data security and data privacy. While these terms are used often interchangeably, they actually represent two very different ways of thinking about information protection. So I want to just spend a few moments clarifying these terms, emphasizing how they differ and how they overlap, and I'm sure that the members of the roundtable will elaborate on the admittedly basic points that I'm going to make this morning. So let's start with data security. We can think of data security as being like the fortified walls of a castle, protecting whatever valuables are stored inside. It encompasses the technical, the physical, the administrative measures put in place to make sure that data is safeguarded and data is protected from theft or unauthorized intrusions. You can think of encryption, firewalls, antivirus software, all of the things that you need for a robust strategy to guard against various cyber threats. So in essence, data security is about ensuring that only those with proper access or authorization can actually access the data, whether it's stored on servers or transmitted across networks or housed in physical devices. So if data security is about defending the castle walls, so to speak, we can think of data privacy as respecting the personal boundaries of those who have their valuables stored behind the walls. Fundamentally, data privacy focuses on the level of control individuals have over their personal information. That means control over what information of theirs is collected, control over how that information is used, and control over how that information is shared and with whom. Right? So data privacy, in other words, is about respecting the desire and indeed the rights of individuals to keep certain aspects of their lives private. Much of what we think of as data privacy focuses on the laws, the regulations, the policies that determine the control over and the use of personal digital data. To illustrate the difference between these terms, consider the following scenario. Imagine a company that collects consumer data for marketing purposes. Data security measures would require the company to encrypt the data to make sure that there's no unauthorized access. It would also likely involve implementing secure login procedures, among other measures. A focus on data privacy, by contrast, would require the company to obtain consent from consumers before using their personal information for various marketing schemes. It would also likely include options for consumers to opt out entirely. Today's discussion will concern both data security and data privacy, and I'm sure the Roundtable will consider the important overlap between these two approaches to information protection. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from them on how best organizations can keep these two privacy concerns front and center as they develop effective practices in data management. So, having explained these two terms, or at least the very basics of these two terms, I want to turn things over now to my colleague, Dr. David Kenley. Thank you.
It's my privilege to introduce today's panelists. You should all have access to the printed program that includes information regarding each of them, and I encourage you to look at it to fully appreciate their many accomplishments. They are all leaders in their fields and have much to teach us regarding data privacy today. I wrote my comments here not knowing exactly which order they were going to be sitting in, so you might want to raise your hands when I get to you, if you don't mind. Carl Adam, who is our president of the South Dakota Bankers Association. In addition to his work in banking, he has served as a trustee for Pierre Rollins Municipal Library Board, was a member of the St. Mary's Foundation Board of Directors, and was the South Dakota Republican chairperson from 2006 to 2008. Carl and I had a brief Zoom chat a few days ago, and I noticed over his shoulder he has a life-size cutout of himself. So you might want to ask about that if you get a chance. Yeah. Michael Adeline. Dr. Adeline is Professor Emeritus of Agriculture and Biosystems Engineering at SDSU. Adeline once said, and I'm quoting him here, "The guiding premise for me has been the university's land grant mission and using technology to improve lives for the citizens of South Dakota, their children, and to make a difference in their lives." We are lucky to have him as a fellow South Dakotan. Christoph Bausch. He's the COO of SAB Biotherapeutics. He earned a PhD in microbiology from the Ohio State University, an MBA from St. Louis University, and a BA in biology from the University of Nebraska. And I think it goes without saying, he is one of the smartest men in the room. Jim Edmond is the cybersecurity advisor for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency for South Dakota. For some of you who may remember, in 1996, Dr. Edmond led the effort to wire every K-12 school across 176 districts for internet service. And since then, he has continued to help make South Dakota a leader in connectivity. And the state is much improved as a result of his service. So thank you. Jay Phoebus, the CIO of First Premier Bank. You can tell a lot about what is important to Mr. Phoebus, not only through his work at First Premier, but also in how he spends his free time. As I was visiting with him before our session, he told me how much he values his time on the board of directors for the Bishop Dudley Hospitality House. And he volunteers at the banquet and Feeding South Dakota. The Argus leader has called him one of the movers and shakers of South Dakota. Brooke Kammerman. Brooke and I have known each other for a while, and it's my privilege to introduce him. He's the CIO of Avera Health. He's been credited with fostering a strong culture of innovation at Avera Health. He's worked in a variety of hospitals across the country, including Holy Cross Hospital, where my son was born. So we've got that in common.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Cameron. Jared Anzac. Jared is the Sanford Health's Chief Digital Officer with responsibility over the enterprise data and analytics teams, as well as Sanford's AI teams. Prior to coming to Sanford, Anzac was at Highmark Health in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Jared, I'm also a former Pennsylvania Keystoner, so you are all right by me. And thanks for joining us today. And I think last is Kevin Streff. Here at the end, many of you know Kevin Streff. He was formerly a faculty member here at DSU for many years. He was one of the first individuals I met when I came to the university, and I was instantly impressed by his amazing energy, his optimism, and his entrepreneurial spirit. I'm very grateful to call him a colleague. Our moderators for today will be, of course, President Yosei Marie Griffiths, President of Dakota State University. She deserves much of the credit for turning DSU into a national leader in the fields of computer and cyber sciences. I joined the DSU family 4 years ago, and it's not any exaggeration to say she is the reason I came here. Having personally worked with several universities over my nearly 30-year career, I have never been associated with anyone with her vision, energy, and commitment. She is starting her 10th year at DSU, and I hope we can continue to thrive under her leadership for many, many more years. And last but not least, of course, he needs no introduction, Senator Thune. We're grateful that he could be with us today. From his days at Murdo High School, where, if I'm not mistaken, you still have a couple of athletic records on the books.
Yeah.
To his many years serving in Congress, Senator Thune has always represented South Dakota with integrity, grit, and exceptional leadership. Through his important committee work, Senator Thune has become a leader in the fields of cyber sciences, and as such is a natural supporter of Dakota State University. We are so grateful to him and his office for supporting this roundtable today. So with that, I will turn it over to our two moderators and to our panelists. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kinley. Good morning. It's great to have everybody here. It's a great panel we have assembled here together and a great crowd and a really important subject. So thank you for your hospitality and making it possible for us to have this conversation about an issue which I think has not only implications for our economy and for people and how they behave and interact in an increasingly changing technological world, but also has serious national security implications, something that DSU has been very involved with and created a wonderful workforce and has played such a leadership role. It's put Dakota State University and South Dakota really on the map in this space, and it's a really important one. Let me just, and I appreciate Dr. Bendix, you drawing that distinction between data security and data privacy. They are used interchangeably in many cases, and I do that myself. But I do think that they are interrelated, and both are increasingly important. We've seen some legislation federally through the years. Graham Leach Bliley dealt with financial services, and we'll probably hear about that from Carl and some of our financial institutions. HIPAA laws, which our healthcare systems are very familiar with. But we've never really been able to come up with a sort of more general framework when it comes to data security / data privacy. The Europeans did that 6 years ago. They passed their GDPR, their General Data Protection Regulation, and some would argue that there are mandates there that are a little bit overreaching and perhaps penalties that are too excessive. But since then, we've had states all over the country that have passed their own laws. And there's obviously nothing wrong with that, but it does create a patchwork approach and makes it more challenging, I think, for a lot of the folks who are operating in that environment to have to deal with, especially if you're doing business across state lines. So you've got companies that are challenged by that. I think a national standard would be a better approach. And frankly, Congress has tried and failed over the years to do that. And I say that with some personal conviction, because when I was chairman of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, it was one of the issues that eluded us. We got a lot of important legislation done. We reauthorized all the transportation sectors. I call it trains, planes, automobiles. We moved some important spectrum legislation to creating a pipeline of spectrum for to fuel the broadband surge in this country, and a number of other issues. But one of the issues that we came very close to, we were at the 11th hour at the end of one congressional session, was privacy. And we had all the stakeholders involved and members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, and we just couldn't quite get there. And there have been attempts since, most recently this last week, a couple of weeks ago, there was a bill filed, a bipartisan bill in the Senate and the House, and one that's getting a lot of attention and being looked at and considered as a possible solution. I think it's probably not going to be the landing place, but it gets the conversation started. But it is important that we get it right, because if you have overly restrictive requirements that don't materially advance privacy, it would be a step backward. And so I think what I'm hoping we can achieve is to try and find that bipartisan consensus on what an American approach to data privacy will be and will look for, and look like, I should say. But I think there are two fundamental questions that we need to answer. And the first one is, how do we strike that right balance between innovation and privacy? There are some amazing things happening. We're dealing with, I've got a bill right now that deals with artificial intelligence. That's also technology that is going to transform the way we do everything in this country. Enormous upside potential, but also some risks that need to be mitigated. And so we're taking a hard look at that and trying to come up with some solutions in that space. And then secondly, how can we ensure that individuals' rights are respected in an increasingly digital world? Those are complex questions and weighty questions that we have to grapple with, but they're issues that we need to address. And so I appreciate everybody being here to share their insights, and I'm hopeful that we can make meaningful progress toward a more effective and stronger data privacy approach. So I want to thank you all who are here, panelists, for your dedication to this issue. I know you're all working in various sectors of our economy, and particularly want to thank Dakota State University and Dr. Griffiths for her leadership, and for the team that you have assembled and put together here, many of whom we've heard from, that is forging and leading the innovation in this space, and it's created a real opportunity not only for DSU but for the state of South Dakota and frankly for our country. So thank you for hosting us here today and for the opportunity to have this conversation. I look forward to it, hearing from our panelists, and just appreciate you putting this on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, all of you. You've heard the people you heard at the podium were largely the organizing committee here, so thanks to them. They've done a great job in convening this panel. I have only one comment, and no females on it, and I know you had a female on it who had to pull out, so kudos to you, you managed. But this tells us as educators where we need to do a little bit of work to get more females into the workforce. I've always said that privacy and security are two sides of the same coin. You can't really talk about one without thinking about the other. They're not completely independent, and it's important that we look at them together. The other thing is, I think, you know, we all monitored what was happening in Europe with the GDPR, and the Europeans do love these big frameworks that they take a lot of time to organize and debate among all the multiple countries and then put it in place, and they do tend to be rather restrictive. So we tend to see the opposite way go ahead in the United States, and I think in the end we end up somewhere in the middle between top down and bottom up. But I think that data security and privacy are becoming increasingly important in the age of artificial intelligence. You know, as you mentioned, we talked about the financial services sector and then the healthcare sector. We've already dealt with some of those issues, but with the level of adoption of artificial intelligence techniques and the increasing both overt and covert surveillance, and I'm not really talking Big Brother here, but our data are collected by everyone, right? Go buy something in the store, you're on camera, you're going to be at the point of sales, there are photographs being taken of you, all your biometrics are being taken, and you may not be aware of it. And I think now is the time really to have this conversation and have it very seriously. But I want to credit Kevin Streff. Dr. Streff came to my office numerous times, very excited, didn't quite pound on my desk, he was more polite than that. We have to look at privacy, data privacy, privacy engineering. You remember those days. And you put that in my head. You had a student, I think, who mapped out the area very, very nicely, and I still have that mapping. It is an important part of if we're going to be involved in this high-tech world and we're educating people for the future workforce, we have to be responsible to be a little bit ahead of the curve and make sure we educate our students and graduate people so that they're knowledgeable, not when they arrive, but when they leave, and the world has already changed 4 years worth by the time they leave here. So it's very, very important. So thank you, Dr. Streff, for your consistent input on this issue, and I'm really glad you were able to come back and join us today. As we look at data privacy and security, we talked about the fact that there is clearly a technical side to this. Privacy, we talk about privacy engineering, and we can build that in to the systems we're developing. But then there's the other side, more of the societal context, which is critically important when we start talking about privacy. And that includes things like individuals' behavior. It reminds me, when I was on the National Science Board and gas got to more than $4 a gallon, I recall, we were running around the country talking about alternative fuels. This is the time for alternative fuels, and people will start switching what they do. Well, nobody switched because nobody had considered the behavioral and economic issues that cause people to make a decision one way or another. So this whole behavioral area, I think, is important. Also management, how are we going to manage privacy? How are we going to develop policy and law that evolves out of this? And then I think across both the technical side and the societal side, we have ethics. And we're talking a lot about ethics vis-a-vis AI. It sort of factors right back in, and it's something we want to incorporate, and we have started to incorporate into all of our academic programs. So from the university's perspective, we have very excellent and enthusiastic faculty that are engaging in these topics and talking about them and starting to include them in our class. We are planning to have a degree program, a higher degree program, we hope, in data privacy, and that's in process. And we just think this is the way of the future. And I think, Kevin, the time really is now. I know we talked about it in 2017, but I think now is the time. It's the perfect time. Everybody is becoming much, much more aware of the very, very large volumes of data that are collected. that we know are being collected and we don't know are being collected, and so we really need to start addressing this. So the panel is great because you cover so many different industries and organizations. And I believe now we're going to move on where each of you will have up to 2 minutes, it says in my instructions, to respond and frame your organization or your industry's interest in data privacy. So shall we just go around the table? It seems to me that's the easiest way. So Dr. Adeline, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Griffiths. I need to first disclose and disclaim that I'm chair of the Federal Task Force on Precision Agriculture and Connectivity. And what I'm going to talk about is my personal opinion, and not the task force, and not the FCC, and not the USDA. So the lawyers told me I had to say all those things. So had to get that out of the way. Thank you for the invitation to provide information on this important and evolving issue of data privacy. It is my privilege to present on an issue that is top of mind as we move forward in precision agriculture, transforming the #1 industry in South Dakota. When it comes to data privacy for farmers and ranchers, it is all about trust. As Vice President for Technology and Security and Emeritus Professor of Agricultural Engineering, I've been thinking about this since 1990, when I was an assistant professor charged with spinning up a server to provide South Dakota farmers and ranchers with digital tools to support their operation. These tools allow producers to customize various scenarios with their data to help in decision making. It's extremely important to assure those who use the platform that we could be trusted in their personal data, and their personal data would not be shared with others without their consent. Consent was extremely important for them. Fast forward to today. The USDA is supporting university researchers through the National Agricultural Producers Data Co-op, housed at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The major issue the groups are working on are who owns the data, how can we trace the chain of custody of the data, and can we provide the right assurances so data owners and researchers can use the data in large data lakes when you aggregate all that data. Precision agriculture will, when fully implemented, be magnitudes more granular in the data flows so that data privacy is a top concern. You know, President, you talked about is being gathered. The magnitude of the data gathered will be enormous. The robustness of precision ag technologies will connect farm and ranch headquarters with their self-driving tractors, drones, geofencing, automated feeders. It connects producers to implement dealers, ag industry providers, and markets through their field equipment back to headquarters and onto the cloud. So that data is flowing all through the whole ecosystem of technology. Private data flows from these operations will be massive and very granular, so that it will be extremely necessary to provide assurances of protection and to the producers who generate the data. The need to provide strong assurances will be necessary to get buy-in if precision agricultural participants have an interest in adopting this technology, right? It's all about trust. In order to get full benefit from the new way of producing food and fiber, the private data would need to be merged with other private data to allow AI to learn from all the action that is going, from all the data sets that are being operated. In doing so, it begs the question, who owns the data, at what point, and who benefits from the insights derived from that data? I would like to say that SDSU is deeply committed to supporting producers' use of precision ag technologies and understands data privacy and the concerns of producers. Working together, maintaining the trust with the producers, we certainly think that these issues can be resolved. And I want to thank you both for asking.
Thank you.
You bet.
Well, good morning, everyone. Senator Thune, President Griffiths, thank you for having us here today, and members of the DSU faculty for hosting us. It's a privilege to be here and talk to you a little bit about the banking perspective of the data privacy concerns. So privacy is increasingly important to policymakers and consumers, and the banking industry has long taken this critical issue to heart. They have complied with some of the first privacy laws in the United States, the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. These laws and their implementing regulations have contributed to a culture that emphasizes transparency and safeguarding consumers' personal information. In the past several years, other industries have begun to face the same questions, and as banks and other highly regulated sectors such as healthcare, with respect to their disclosures and their operations. This is due to rapidly shifting landscapes that have seen the passage of at least 15 state omnibus privacy bills or privacy laws, coupled with evolving consumer expectations. Moreover, the question of privacy is critical to emerging areas such as the training data powering generative AI and personal financial data sharing via aggregators. This supercharging of personal information has led to the need for holistic and mature data governance programs to provide adequate internal controls, allowing for safe and responsible innovation. Inextricably bound with these questions are conducting due diligence on vendors such as cloud service providers, effective compliance review to prevent unfair, deceptive, and abusive acts or practices, and living up to regulators' model risk expectations. But it's not all about offense, Senator. I know you like offense. That is, using personal information for banks' own products and services. Defense matters too. For example, protecting against unauthorized access to personal customer information and detecting fraudulent activity. Privacy can be understood as how information is used and shared. Information security is who is authorized to use it. Ultimately, it all boils down to data and an organization's policies and procedures pertaining to it. Banks have learned that they must assemble cross-functional teams comprised of representatives from all across the enterprise, business lines, legal, information security, and more. Only in this way can leadership have a true 360-degree understanding of the entire data life cycle. Moreover, this information must flow continuously to decision makers, ensuring policies and procedures reflect the reality that's happening on the ground. Banks are getting acclimated to this new dynamic and are finding a way in an increasingly digital world. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel and be with you all today. Look forward to sharing more perspectives from our industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I heard words of distinguished and experts, and I looked around and I knew they weren't talking about me, but I am really grateful to be with people that are both of those things. And I know when you look at me, you think that I hold a lot of athletic records. I know that is my hulking strength. I don't have that in common with you, Senator Thune, so I'm really sorry. I was faster than my brother, so that's the extent of my athletic skill. So I would say that one of the biggest challenges that we have from a healthcare perspective is that we understand the sacred trust that it is to care for patients. So when patients come to have services in our facilities, they trust us, and that is it's a position of extreme vulnerability, but they need us to help them. And part of good patient care is good privacy and good security. So when you think about, it was mentioned by Dr. Hawks at the beginning of this with United Health Group of what's recently happened. The Senate Finance Committee had the hearing just a couple of days ago. I don't know how many nerds are in the room, but I'm a C-SPAN junkie. I kind of like that stuff. I'm hoping I can yield my time just to say that at one point in my life. But when that attack occurred to the largest insurer in the country and the largest employer of physicians. So there wasn't you'd be hard pressed to find a healthcare system or a healthcare company that wasn't impacted by that attack. And so when we think about some of our biggest challenges, we do need to share information in order to better care for patients. The challenge that we have is when the information leaves the walls of your facility, what are the provisions or security that is on the other end of that to protect that information? And I don't, that's not unique to healthcare. I think we all experience that challenge. And so I think as I think about our biggest challenge today, that is certainly one of them. So I yield my time to my friend Jay to the left.
Hard act to follow. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's a privilege for me to be here. $151 billion. Let us think for a second. $151 billion. That's the estimated total amount of fraud in the United States. We're not talking millions, we're talking billions, okay? And I think that in the financial industry, obviously we have very, very strict control, regulations. We have great systems that allow us to deter and control fraud from happening. But I think that with the advancements on AI and how exponentially that's going to bring the bad actors tools and mechanisms to really explode even faster than what we are able to contain these threats, I think that it's going to require really strong measures from the industry, from our elected officials, to help us being able to manage what I believe is coming. In other words, we haven't seen anything yet. Okay. What's coming is what's going to be interesting in the next couple of years. And I think that how we control, again, we are allowing, if you allow me the example, we're allowing the bad actors inside the house, and then we're fighting them inside the house. Okay. When we really need to close that door and be sure that the fight is outside of the house versus inside. So I think that it's going to be an interesting conversation. Really looking forward to learn from my peers here, and very timely topic. So Kevin, thank you so much, and thank you for Senator for allowing this here today, for being here with us. And again, I think that we are at the crossroad where we need to take very strong actions today to try to curtail what is going to happen in the next few years. And with that, Christoph.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And as mentioned, I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at SAB Biotherapeutics. In my current role, I oversee all of our discovery research as well as our manufacturing operations for the company. SAB Biotherapeutics is a clinical stage company, publicly traded biopharmaceutical company, with our research and development and manufacturing operations located in Sioux Falls and Canton, South Dakota. SAB employs approximately 65 people, and we have a one-of-a-kind immunotherapy platform for producing fully human polyclonal antibodies. Our lead program is SAB-142, and is a disease-modifying immunotherapy posed to change the treatment paradigm of type 1 diabetes. And we're doing this by delaying the onset and progression of the disease. As an emerging global biotech company developing these new immunotherapeutics, we handle a massive amount of sensitive data, including intellectual property, specifically trade secret information, as well as proprietary research, which is at the core of our cutting-edge platform technology, and clinical trial data that requires meeting regulatory compliance, as mentioned with HIPAA and GDPR. There are two specific challenges that SAB faces that I want to make sure I mention regarding data privacy and cybersecurity. And number one, like most of us here today, is protecting the data from hacking that we face on a daily basis from business to business transactions. But more specifically, the data that we share with global third parties and these contract research organizations, or CROs, ensuring that that data and all of the policies are protected appropriately with this third-party connection, because they are essential for our drug development. Secondly, the significant burden and cost to smaller publicly traded companies like SAB on reporting material cybersecurity incidents to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The new SEC reporting policies as a whole are good and a step in the right direction, But my challenge to the roundtable today, is there an opportunity for reporting requirements, policies, specifically aligned for smaller companies like SAB with fewer resources available to them? So thank you again for the time, and I appreciate being part of this.
I'll start by echoing my colleagues' appreciation for the opportunity to be on this panel and talk about this very important topic. I think, it's a very provocative notion to think that at this time in human history, we have more data available in our pockets, on our wrists, in our bags, and likely less privacy than we've ever had in the history of humanity as a result of that. The free exchange of information across the internet, social media, where we willingly and voluntarily provide information, all of these things that, technology can be used for good and can provide benefits to humanity, can provide convenience and personalization and efficiencies unlike we've ever seen before, can also be used for harm. And in healthcare in particular, when we look at the sensitive data that we have, that sacred trust that we have as healthcare providers caring for patients, that personal health information is particularly sensitive and particularly valuable for bad actors. And so it is incumbent on us to ensure that we're protecting it and securing it and keeping it private from unauthorized access, to ensure that we're maintaining that sacred responsibility of caring for our patients, caring for people. People interact with healthcare in some of the most vulnerable moments that they ever experience in life: birth, illness, death. And it is absolutely essential that we're able to put the right protections in place to ensure that when data is provided to us or when we're storing that data, it's held securely. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have, and I'll echo what my colleague Brooke mentioned, is when data leaves our walls, how do we ensure that our partners, other organizations like the Uniteds and the Change Healthcares, also have the same rigor and the same processes in place to protect that data just as we would. And so a very timely conversation, and looking forward to continuing to learn today.
Thank you, President Griffins, Senator Thune. In regards to the senator's athletic accomplishments, I'm still somewhat amazed how 40 years ago the tall senator qualified for the USD 6 and under intramural league. Okay. But that's a topic for a different day. At CISA, we consider ourselves the nation's cyber defense agency, and so in the data privacy versus data security conversation, we fall totally on the data security side of things. We work with our critical infrastructure stakeholders, public and private sectors, to try and reduce their risk and improve their resiliency in the areas of cybersecurity and physical security. And so we certainly thank the Senator for our annual budget and appreciate his colleagues' support in all we're able to do in the cybersecurity field.
Right, I guess I'm last. By the way, in terms of records and Thunes, I believe those girls that ran at Roosevelt probably had more records than their father. Okay. All right. So yeah, thank you for everybody for coming. And Dr. Griffiths, just congratulations. I mean, how many students do we have now studying cybersecurity in some way, shape, or form here at Dakota State University?
I think it's order of magnitude 1,400.
1,400 students. So here we were some 20 or so years ago, having these same conversations. And now we're having one with data privacy. Right? And to some degree, it's like, well, we're doing a lot, we're doing enough. But then you've got some folks like Jay that is saying, this is just getting ready to kind of bust open. This is exactly where we were 20 years ago with security, and we were having Senate hearings. And Senator Thune, how many years ago were you on campus in the other side of campus where we had a cybersecurity Senate hearing, field hearing? 6 or so years ago or something. You've paid attention to these issues for a long time. And we started 20 years ago without laws, without regulations, without standards, without, kind of states doing their own data breach notification laws, right? And just kind of grounds up because water finds its level. You got to somehow, protect things. And so here we are now with data privacy, really kind of repeating those same steps. Hopefully it's a little bit quicker this time around, right? But what are those laws? What are those standards? What are those technologies across? Do we want sector-specific stuff? I mean, and all of those kinds of questions. Now here we are with data privacy. The last thing I would leave you with data privacy, data security is always about the company really having responsibility for your data. Data privacy isn't that. It's your data. It's not the company's data. So there's this tig and tug that's going to naturally happen then. Because as a company, it's your responsibility to keep their data secure. It's kind of your data. Privacy says, no, it's not your data. It's the consumer's data. They need to see what you have. They need to interact with what you have. They need to have input into what you have. If they don't like it, they need to be able to change it and interact with that data. That's a real tig and tug, which is why I'm excited about it. Dakota State, we're uniquely positioned with the security of 1,400 students, with privacy, then that tig and that tug and artificial intelligence lighting this on fire with machine learning and quantum computing. So thanks, Senator, for being back on campus, and I look forward to the rest of the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. Thanks to all of you. And in a short amount of time, trying to get at the heart of the issue. And as I think, as you point out, these are issues that have only become more complicated in time as technology has continued to evolve. From that meeting that we had here, I think that Dr. Griffith said it was 9 years ago. I believe that time flies. And that was on cybersecurity, and cybersecurity still continues to be, and data security continue to be a really important issue. We've had some breaches just on our phones in the Senate in the last few days. Foreign leaders getting messages from U.S. senators and then calling to say, this seems out of character for you, why are you? And so, I mean, it's constant, and there are bad actors out there, China being chief among them, who do weaponize information, which is why, again, as we look at these issues, it's hard to look at them kind of in isolation. We dealt more specifically with TikTok here recently, and essentially said that if TikTok would be banned unless it could be sold to a U.S. company within the next year. But I don't think what most people realize, 150 million people on TikTok in this country, that all that information, which is collected by ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, is available, if asked for, to the Chinese Communist Party. And that is, so this stuff is being weaponized in a way that creates national security risks, as I mentioned earlier. And I think that's why it's really important that we get this right, not squashing or stifling innovation, but putting some general rules of the road in place and guardrails around this stuff. And part of it is because you're going to continue to see technologies coming in from foreign adversary countries, TikTok being one example, but there'll be another one that comes next. And during the previous administration, the Trump administration, they tried to ban some of these by executive order and were struck down by the courts because it created a constitutional bill of attainder issue. And so trying to come up with a way of doing this legislatively that doesn't run afoul of the Constitution, and I think, frankly, when you've got national security trumps all, that creates an imperative that I think really lends some urgency to getting some things done. But I guess a question I would ask of the panel, just as a sort of kick this off, and feel free to jump in, but maybe if you take it just quickly one by one, what are the most serious threats to data security that you currently see in your sector, and what looming threats concern you the most? Banking, Carl, go ahead. Yeah. Agriculture.
So certainly the ones coming up is, if you think about autonomous tractors, it's already been shown that somebody's hacked John Deere's tractors. I mean, they were able to stop it, in the field. They've been able to do that with drones, and agriculture is really taking off with drones. So the bad actor, whether that be state-sponsored, which could have major implications on agriculture, or it's a disgruntled employee that just wants to mess up your operation, is certainly there. The thorny part, or the tough part, I guess, with dealing with data security is that the real value is in sharing data in the whole agricultural enterprise. There's been quite a bit of research showing that you can have a better impact, a more targeted impact, having that broader set of information. But how do you keep it secure? Because now, the more you let in, the better the opportunity. The security front is now much broader. The threat envelope increases as you allow more and more people into the environment. So I would say, looking forward, it's someone being able to impact those technologies where we don't have a human present. And then the other piece of it is, I think of food security, in both the national sense and in the local sense of if I don't want a crop to fail because someone put the spray, in the wrong plane or drone that flew across.
Yeah.
So I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Senator, good question. As it relates to the banking industry, the most serious threat that we see and we are experiencing, that all of us are experiencing, is the increasing shift to the digital economy means more data is at risk. Our 5 children don't understand what I understand, having done things the old way, but now we do things digitally. Reliance on service providers puts your information security in their hands. That was talked about a lot here, although the bank is ultimately responsible in our sector. Concentration risk for cloud computing, which affects more than just the financial service industry. Critical infrastructure is dependent on big tech companies that function as cloud service providers. Those are our biggest risks and biggest concerns at this point.
Yeah, if you look at it from our perspective, we receive about 25,000 penetration attacks on our network on a week. So if you do the math, and that's not unique to me, I'm sure everyone else has done similar. I think it equates to about every 24 seconds there's an attack on your network. But that isn't actually the biggest risk, because we do have layers of security that help protect us. The biggest risk that we see is from social engineering and from phishing. It goes back to what Jay was saying a few moments ago, that if you can get the credentials of someone who has access to information, you have the keys to the kingdom, and now you're fighting them from the inside. And we had an instance not that long ago that was a phishing email that was sent into our organization. They're looking more credible. So back in the day, it used to be, your rich uncle wants to give you some money, click on the link. We're getting a little smarter, they are anyway. And it was a very credible phishing email that went to all of our senior leaders that said, here is the file for the increases for your employees for this next merit cycle. That happened to be perfectly in line with when our merit cycle increases were occurring. Click on the secure link below to enter in your credentials, again, giving credibility to this concept. You click on the link, and what comes up? Our login page. So it looks as if it's our multi-factor authentication page, has a Vera logo. So people think, well, this is perfect. Put in your login, your user ID, you put in your password, nothing happens. So what happens when you put in your user ID and password and nothing happens? You do it again. So not only do we give it to them once, just in case we didn't give it to them right, we give it to them again. And then they realize this may not be appropriate. So that's real, and that's what's happening. And I think it is one of the biggest risks, not unique to healthcare. I think it's unique to all of us.
Absolutely. I echo Carl's comment on the financial industry, but also Brooks. One of the largest attack vectors for us is phishing and emails. And the second one will be, like the senator, phone calls, right? How they can change the metadata or the name of who's calling you and so And when we look at those two, in our case, we filter between 75 and 95% of the emails that come in. Okay, that's how much we do. We filter millions of hits on our websites through our tools. So that's not unique to me. That's how we all have to deal with these issues daily. We go through hundreds of attacks constantly. And as you mentioned, it's not the email that was badly spelled that you knew that it was done in some other foreign country. Now they're extremely, extremely sophisticated, to the point that there was just a recent incident that I read 2 days ago in the banking industry, where the bad actors, they look at where the ATM locations were with Google, they look at all the executive names in LinkedIn, they look at who are the vendors that provide services to that company. They engineer a complete scenario that it was so credible that anybody would have clicked on it. Okay? And all it takes is one click. Okay? All it takes is one click, because now the person is inside. So going back to my previous comment, how do we stop it at the door versus in the back end when we need to exercise the controls? Well, the controls is great, but reality is that with AI today, this is, again, exponentially is gonna be changing, because the speed and sophistication of this attack is gonna be incredible what's gonna happen in the next few years. So it's really how we put some stops at the beginning. For example, the phone calls. Perhaps if we ensure that when a call is issued, and it's issued from Jay, that we know that when it gets to that person, it says Jay Phoebus, versus it changes through the different carriers that it goes through. And at the end of the day, you don't know if the call is really from me or not. So I should have the ability to know who's calling me. So in the case of your colleague, foreign dignitaries, they should have been able that it was truly from you or not. Okay? In the case of the URLs and the phishing, well, if we are able to validate, certify, in the banking industry, for example, there is one URL, the .bank, that has to go through a certification. They need to bet that we are who we are in order to give us that. So anybody that uses the .bank URL have the comfort of knowing that any transaction coming from the .bank URL is a legit one. So why not to extend that to everything else? Because it will curtail the amount of hackers and phishing and all these kind of attack tremendously. So with that, Crystal.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. The phishing is a huge problem, and you've heard personally from everybody. We have the same challenges, and a specific example for us is the reliance we have on programs like DocuSign. And the phishing socialization has gotten so good. I get DocuSign notes that I sometimes think are legitimate. So that is a real challenge. But the most serious threat to us is the extortionware that's out there. And it's the threat of encryption after the threat that is also the biggest concern to us and risk coming through these phishing channels. So we're working heavily on that. And for SAB, the way we deal with those, because we can as a small company with 65 plus employees, is to heavily focus this on individual training for every time, ensuring that we can recognize, we can catch these phishing programs and have those embedded. But at the end of the day, it comes down to an individual is how you keep them out of the house, Jay. And I think that has worked for us, but when you're a company of over 15,000 employees, it's a more difficult challenge. The second one that we struggle with, and I mentioned, is how do we protect the same kind of hacking that is occurring with our third-party CROs. We're not there. We can't ensure that training. We can't ensure those policies. We can oversee them. We can challenge them. But how do we have policies, particularly when we're a global company, to ensure that that kind of hacking with our sensitive private information on these clinical trials is protected from these CROs? Jared.
Just to, I think, reinforce, we're in an arms race with cyber criminals, right? And if we think that we can use the same budget and the same technology and the same resources that we had 2 years ago, we're going to be behind because they're continuing to advance and technology continues to advance. And the sophistication of the attacks, continues to advance. And so one of the big challenges that we have is in healthcare, we operate on razor-thin margins as is, and those dollars are being competed for advances in medical care and treatment and devices. And so how do we ensure that we're also staying ahead of investment in our data security practices and our data privacy practices and our infrastructure to ensure that we're staying ahead of the bad actors that are using similar technologies to threaten us? It's only a matter of time before generative AI becomes the next mechanism that's used to create social engineering campaigns and scrub all of that information that's publicly available about what a company has, who works there, and what relationships they have with other companies to create a very targeted and precise attack that looks legitimate and then ultimately leads to disastrous consequences.
Ransomware, the easiest, that's the greatest threat that we see from a national perspective. From a sector perspective, healthcare and finance have always been traditional targets. Recently, though, water and wastewater has been a big target from our friends in Iran. Senator mentioned China. You also have to throw Russia and North Korea in that bucket of nation states with significant cyber threats against us also. So ransomware really is kind of the end result of what a lot of these attacks are searching for. Steal the data, encrypt it, hold them ransom for whatever they can get out of them.
Well, I'm not going to repeat what everybody else said. I think for the last 25, 30 years, if you think about what security is the CIA. It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For the first 30 years of this, we've been really fighting the confidentiality fight. And what we're seeing, I believe, into the future, what we're going to see are integrity and availability fights, similar on scale to this identity theft kind of confidentiality fight. And then really these cyber gangs and all really cooperating together to really take down some of that infrastructure that Jim's talking about, right? From an availability perspective, it's one thing somebody submits my tax return. I mean, that's a pain. But it's another thing when I can't turn the lights on in South Dakota in January or the heat. And I think that's the next level of this over the next 20, 30 years. And with ChatGPT and impersonating me and impersonating stuff, along with the availability focus rather than the confidentiality focus, I don't think we've seen anything yet.
Let me just quickly, and I'll flip it to Dr. Griffiths here, because I think one of the issues that Dakota State's clearly very involved in is the whole workforce issue. And whether or not you think there's a sufficient workforce of privacy professionals, and if not, how do we build that pipeline? And if you just take that or respond to that, and then maybe anybody else that has anything else to add to that.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be brief. And I think the evolution at Dakota State was 40 years ago this year, where we had our mission change and we became an institution focused on computing and everything that evolved from computing. And on that solid basis, it was 2004, I believe, when we started in cybersecurity programs. So we have academic programs. I think we have about 7 now in both offensive and defensive cybersecurity at various levels. When I came, I said it was important that we move into artificial intelligence. It's coming, it's here, it's going to be big. So we now have 3 programs in artificial intelligence. And when you look at artificial intelligence, it requires a lot of data and it requires a lot of compute capability as we evolve from simple applications to the kind of applications that we're talking about that will make huge difference to humanity and the world. And so on the data side, we've got program in data analytics. On the compute side, in addition to our computer science, we've just got funding from the state to develop this collaborative center in quantum information science and technology, and we'll be coming forward with a program in quantum computing very shortly. The piece that's missing is this whole privacy side of things that ties to the data and the artificial intelligence. And so for us, looking at privacy, as the conversations I had with Kevin over the years state, this is a very important area for us to get into. But I'll make one other comment. I've been involved in STEM education for most of my career. And for decades, we've been arguing we need more young people coming into STEM areas. Mm-hmm. Then it was we need more people in computing, and coding in the high schools became a big deal. Then it was computational thinking. Then it was cybersecurity for all. Then it was AI for all. Now I'm seeing the national quantum strategy says quantum for all. We don't have enough people, and we actually have a population that's not growing at the rate that we need it to. So I think we have to be very strategic in how we build academic programs. We want to have academic programs that aren't so siloed that you just become an expert in one area, but these programs tie together. So we're doing a lot of work on how we can take curriculum elements and put them together. So Dr. Bendix is leading our cyber leadership and intelligence degree program, and that does exactly that. Mm-hmm. The more we can bring components of computer science, cybersecurity, offensive or defensive, along with artificial intelligence, whether that's the highly technical developmental side of AI or the applications of AI, the data side, whether we're looking at data analytics or privacy, and then quantum computing, other advanced techniques. And I should mention something that must be very close to your heart also, broadband technology capabilities, and you had a field hearing in Sioux Falls a number of years ago on that. All of these are very critical to this emerging area. But the bottom line is the threat surface is increasing. With every new device we connect in new and interesting ways. The threat actors are growing. There are more and more of them because it's easier for them to sort of now attack this threat surface. And you're right, it's when they work together, when they combine, so it's not just a single actor trying to get money out of an organization, but nation states working not even individually, but collectively to bring down major components of our infrastructure and our way of life. I think that we do have to be concerned. So this is an important area for education for us. And as an academic institution, we want to start education of young people in the K-12 environment. So the question is, how do we restructure education from K-12 all the way through the university sector and on through careers so that people are aware? So I guess I'll just point back to your original question. Is there a sufficient workforce of privacy professionals? And if so, how do we build that pipeline?
I'm happy to jump in. I have a girl's name, so I represent the female representation on the panel. But I will say, DSU, I want to give credit to DSU's cyber program. We'll start with that. If you look at the statistics, only 25% of cybersecurity professionals are female. So we're missing out on an entire portion of the population. We're missing that significantly. So that's one aspect of it. The other one I would say is that when I moved to South Dakota, I was asked the question, do you bleed green or do you bleed blue? Now, when you're in healthcare, everyone's like, yeah, you a Sanford or you a Vera? Well, the reality is we work really closely together. Our cyber teams, our cybersecurity teams talk to each other on a regular basis. And so as the bad actors are coming together, we should be doing the same thing across industries. There's no reason Jay and I shouldn't be having regular conversations about what he's seeing and what I'm seeing. So that's the second point. The third point would be, this isn't about individuals of the cyber team. We have to engage our entire workforce. If I have 18,000 employees in my organization, they all have to become cyber experts in some way, shape, or form, because it's going to take all of us in order to combat this the right way. So just a few thoughts there.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. Great points, Brooke. I kind of didn't know if you were a man or a woman, but now good to know. Good to sit with you. Good to be with you. Yes, in banking, yes, there is a training of longstanding federal privacy laws, such as Gramm-Leach-Bliley and the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which I mentioned earlier. And fortunately for university systems like DSU that builds that feeder system for financial service industries to employ these individuals, that's really key. In addition to the trends to cross-functional teams that has led to more formalized governance, and in order to benchmark, many will pursue certifications from bodies such as the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Those certifications are extremely important. I think it was mentioned earlier, not only in the financial service industry, healthcare, but those certifications should be encouraged.
I'd make a couple comments on this from a workforce development perspective. I've had the opportunity in the last, since January 1st, to be in 12 different states as a speaker at different banking conventions. And as I work the room and talk with folks, there isn't a privacy officer named hardly in the banking sector. So we're just getting started with this. I mean, where are we going to get that workforce? What I would leave you with, Senator, is what really, even though we have a cybersecurity workforce shortage, it's well documented. But what really helped that? It would help it not be even worse, was the Center of Excellence program that the NSA created. That, for those of you that don't know, we were the 38th Center of Excellence there in 2004, I believe, and ever since. And it's just been an army of folks that have been around and doing this at Dakota State University. And now I believe, Dr. Podorowski, you may have the statistics better than I do, but I think there's over 500 centers of excellence. There's community colleges. There's all kinds of things as it relates to that. And you don't have to be a center of excellence. Other universities in South Dakota look at us, and I remember in North Dakota, we're looking at us going, oh, they're a center of excellence. We can't be that this year, but we got to start laying down some of these things so that eventually we can become a center of excellence. And I think we have a recent announcement with the tribal college here in the Dakotas that was named a new center of excellence in this. What is the equivalent of that to catalyze that for data privacy? It's not going to be through the NSA likely, but so what is that? Is that through the FTC, like with the new bill that was put out, with the FTC having the enforcement capability there? But that's really a data broker law. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think that's something that's worth investigating.
Okay. Well, there's always a lot of, there's reluctance, I will say, to, in fact, one of the pushbacks on the new bill is too much authority to the FTC. There's 16 rulemaking authorities in the bill, and how do you keep this? This is the conversation we have all the time: light touch versus heavy hand. You want to have you want to make sure that you're doing the right things in terms of security and privacy, but also not stifling innovation and everything that comes with that. So it's a balance you have to strike. And that's always been the challenge in this space, is how do we do it? So you mentioned earlier, go ahead.
I was going to jump.
Oh.
I was going to jump. We've got a lot of questions, and we're not going to get to all of them.
Right.
So I was going to just jump back to what someone said, but I think you were also going to jump back to what someone
said. Well,
I
was, but that's okay. If you want to go ahead.
Okay. I was going to go back to this issue that it's not a single person's responsibility, that it's everyone's responsibility, and to ask the question about how can your organizations foster a culture of privacy and security awareness to employees at all levels. Because I think that's part of what we're talking about also in education. We have to get it at all levels. Throw that out.
I think that you very well said is education. In our case, First Premier Bank Card, we are constantly sending phishing emails to our people. And when somebody failed one of those emails, we very nicely say, hey, this was your fail, this is what you need to watch for the next time, and so on. But it is so effective because the team has become so sensitive to being careful that I get those emails from the security team saying, hey, is this a phishing email? Well, it's not, it's a legit one, but it's because we have created that sensitivity that, so I think that constant education of the user, because at the end of the day, we can have the best security measures in the world. All it takes is one wrong click. So I think that for me is the most important one.
One quick comment. We always think about it from terms of the organization. We're trying to protect the organization, so we provide the training. What we found effective is if we actually give them something meaningful for them of how they're protecting themselves personally, it actually makes us even better as an organization. So it's when they understand that multi-factor authentication is really important, don't opt out of that. Those types of things, if they can do that in their personal life, we're going to have better cybersecurity in our own organizations as well.
Yeah,
we like to call that the human firewall. There's lots of technology out there, but that 5 inches between our ears is just as important as any technology that's there. train them, educate them, hold them accountable, but make sure they understand that they're dealing with important data.
And what about, implementing courses that are part of a standard curriculum for anybody getting a BA or any kind of degree? Well, I used to take typing. That's no longer present, but now I think we can roll back in programs that everybody goes through as part of your mandatory degree to understand how you protect personal information in the workplace.
I was really bad at typing, so that's anybody else here had to take that back in the day. So that's a really good point. And I know right now we're dealing with the IRS, for example, has employees who have personal taxpayer information on their devices and also have TikTok on those devices. And I mean, to me, that's just like, hello, so you talk about as an organization putting those kinds of safeguards in place. Let me come back to something you said, Dr. Streff, earlier, and that is that the information that people have, it is their data. Mm-hmm. It's their personal data, right? So the question is, how can individuals be empowered to have more control over that personal data, and what steps can organizations take to make sure that there is transparency and accountability in their data practices? And we talked a little bit specifically about agriculture because of precision agriculture and how much some of that information can be really useful to a farmer or rancher with respect to conservation practices on their farm, for example. And so it is their data. And yet, in many cases, they maybe don't have the kind of access to it that they should. But if you're going to have organizations, that are sharing information that they have access to with the people for whom it is their information, how does an organization create more transparency and accountability for how that data gets handled?
Go ahead. Pardon me.
I'll start with healthcare. I think, we've come a long ways in the last 15, 20 years just in terms of best practices and standards with access to data like patient portals and member portals. Before the advent of the electronic health record, you'd have to request from the medical records department your medical record, and you'd get printed out a stack of paper to take with you home. Now you can access it at your convenience on your own device. And I think that's come a long ways in terms of giving access to patients to their own personal health information, as well as standards around being able to download and store and transmit that information by the patients to other healthcare providers or to other entities. And so we've come a long ways, I think, in that regard. But data sharing and interoperability in healthcare has been notoriously challenging. We're starting to make some progress with new interoperability standards like FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource, and HL7 and different data sharing opportunities, but those come with risk too. The more you make data available to transmit, the more you have to ensure that you have the proper protections in place to secure that data when it is transmitted and that it's being accessed by the right people.
Well, I think as consumers, we have to decide, do we want privacy or not? Because you mentioned TikTok. How much data do we give away in TikTok, Facebook, Snap, Instagram, whatever? Then we turn around and we ask the industry, well, I gave it away for free, but I need you guys to protect it. Well, which way do we want it?
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
If I may, there is the idea between right to be forgotten, right to be deleted, and how do we provide the customers and our users with their information, right? Your question. We have also, as our ecosystem had changed from used to be my company, my systems are in here, now we have dozens, if not hundreds, of third-party vendors. Okay? And it's not just our data, it's how do we ensure that we provide information of that third party, how can they delete that information, and so on. So it had become extremely complex as we become an open ecosystem. So it's a matter of how do we, to your point, Jim, how do we know what the user wants? How do we know what the customer wants? And I kind of look at, we have the do not call less for phone, we have the do not call registry. Well, what if we were to have a do not call or do not, thank you, a do not collect and share my data registry, where companies, and again, I don't like it. I would have to go and check with that registry, but it will be a way to know exactly what the customers and the users want, protecting the constituents. So the same way, again, as we have the do not call registry, maybe makes sense to look at what about a do not collect and share my data.
And I'll piggyback on that, Senator, Dr. Griffiths. So the question is, how can individuals be empowered to have more control of their personal data? Bear in mind, we're the banking industry, also known in some instances as the financial service industry. This is happening in real time. So in Congress, there has been recently a proposed rule, Section 1033 of the Dodd-Frank. Section 1033 of the Dodd-Frank gives consumers the right to access and share their financial data. 1033 requires financial service providers, banks, to make available to consumers and representatives acting on their behalf certain information in those providers' control. That can include information like consumers' transactions or balance in their financial account. So consent is the key to sharing data, and privacy security considerations are at the forefront. At a level playing field, including supervision of all entities that use personal information to deliver products and services, is essential. If a company acts like a bank, from our industry perspective, we want them to be regulated like a bank. That protects the consumers and financial stability.
Absolutely. Okay. You want to go or you want me to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to actually combine a couple of questions here. So, do current data privacy regulations for your industry adequately address recent advances in AI? And if not, where do they fall short? And how can we protect data privacy while continuing to foster innovation in fields like AI?
I wrote on my notes, we'll find out. That's what I wrote, like, we'll find out. I think there's just so many questions about it right now that are fascinating, and I think many of you saw the New York Times end up suing Microsoft and OpenAI just recently for potentially, allegedly, taking all their articles to train the models. And so, the question is, in the healthcare sector, we have good rules and regulations with HIPAA, as was mentioned. But I think we are sort of in uncharted territory with AI and what information is being gathered, how is it being stored, where is it being stored, are still some questions that are left unanswered. I know Jared has some thoughts on this too.
No, happy to jump on that. I think, HIPAA has been in place for a long time and I think does a really good job in terms of providing a lot of the regulatory protections that we need to follow as it pertains to AI. What we don't have regulated today in healthcare, at least with AI, and even more broadly, is a standard of quality around AI that's being developed. And so that becomes a little bit problematic or challenging because you don't know what data was used to train a particular algorithm and how that algorithm will perform in the healthcare setting for your patient population unless you have the mechanism to validate that data or that algorithm on your own data. And so we're doing this at Sanford. We have a very robust and organic process to ensure that we are testing and validating the quality of an AI algorithm with a data set that represents our population, our patient data, not a population that was based in London where that algorithm may have been trained on. And so we're seeing a lot of organic movement in the industry. Sanford is part of a coalition of 38 other health systems that have come together with the White House and with other federal agencies to help to provide some standards and guidelines and best practices without having the regulation in place to ensure that we're responsibly and ethically developing and deploying AI in the right ways, in safe and secure ways, without inhibiting the ability to innovate, but doing so in a very responsible and guarded way. And so we're sharing best practices, we're sharing our AI governance models for others to learn from and to emulate. And we feel like that community of practice, again, it's not blue versus green, it's how do we together as an industry support each other in taking advantage of some of these capabilities and technologies for the benefit of our patients, for the benefit of our organization, but doing so in an ethical and safe and responsible way.
Well, I would just say, and I think this is something that we're going to be grappling with and trying to figure out what government's role is and how to do it appropriately. We had the first bill out there on artificial intelligence. I did it with Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota and a handful of people off of the Senate Commerce Committee, basically trying to differentiate between generative AI, high impact AI, critical impact AI, and create a framework where you aren't slowing down or stifling innovation, but mitigating or at least putting some rules in place for the riskier applications. And a lot of it comes back to basic things like transparency. I mean, I just think that, it's and frankly, when it comes to the use of algorithms, I believe for a long time, and I've got another bill that we call the filter bubble bill, because people get in bubbles thanks to algorithms, and that you ought to have more control over that. If you're being manipulated by an algorithm, they ought to tell you that, and they ought to give you the option not to have if you get content in a chronological feed or some other form that lets you opt out of the algorithm. And I think too on AI, if you're receiving content from somebody that's deploying an artificial intelligence system, they ought to tell you that. You ought to know that. Whether it's video or text or there's just so much stuff around this. I mean, ChatGPT and how you have to use AI now to determine when somebody's using ChatGPT on a college paper. So AI is creating a whole range of new questions which we're all grappling with. But I guess I want to come back to as we think about the issue of data privacy, and certainly the artificial intelligence is going to add another level of context to that. But how many of your businesses operate, I know the healthcare systems and banks too, across many states, and is the patchwork of state laws adding to the compliance burden, and do they add value? And is there an argument to be made for why there ought to be some sort of a national law or framework around this? And because I'm guessing there are regulations and compliance requirements that are associated with your various sectors, and how big of the challenge is it to comply with those data protection regulations? What kinds of changes would you like to see enacted? And should that be a national or a federal framework as opposed to a state-by-state approach?
Just one quick thought on that. Kevin mentioned this really early on, that although HIPAA is a federal law, the breach notifications is done by state. And so, talk about one area that would be, I think, relatively simple to sort of across, from a federal perspective, say breach notification should look like this. And because that does put an undue burden on health systems that operate, or any industry that operates in multiple states.
Yeah, and law and regulation sometimes gets a bad reputation, favorably and unfavorably. I mean, PAC committees fight against it, right? Who wants more law and who wants more regulation? But I saw multi-factor authentication come out in 2005. And before that, banks were doing it, we weren't doing it, it's too expensive, do we pass the cost on to consumers? When that came across as a federal regulatory requirement, they all did it, and then here we are. So I think it's the same thing here in data privacy. I mean, I've talked with the regulators. They don't really have the authority to go and do a privacy exam to see if they've done a privacy assessment, updated the incident response to make sure they've got privacy incidents, doing privacy cookie testing and all those kinds of things. They don't have the authority. So while we don't want bloated federal regulation, we don't want a patchwork of state laws. Some of these DSAR requests are 15 days. Some of them are 45 days. Some I can do once a year. Some I can do every 6 months. Like what is this? If I've got a bank and I've got consumers in 12 states, I got to comply with all this stuff. So good, thin, right legislation, in my perspective, in watching this, not being in one organization, but being across that for years, has always helped. I mean, when we talk about GDPR gets a bad reputation because of those heavy fines. But is it right? Is it wrong? I'm not sure that it's really that far off. It's probably a little far-reaching, and the fines are crazy, right? They can be billions of euros, right? So I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that I've seen fair competition, and I've seen improvements in this, and the reason why I believe the banking sector is very resilient in cybersecurity. I'm very proud of the work that they've done over 25 years there. Make no mistake about it. If Graham Leach-Bliley wasn't there, and the regulators weren't there, and IT exams weren't there, and annual audits weren't there, and annual pen tests and things like that weren't there, we wouldn't be here as consumers with a protected financial system.
Right.
Yeah, this is near and dear to my heart too, particularly regarding HIPAA, and HIPAA is working well, but when we're dealing with GDPR in Europe, it's a different challenge, and I think the solution here, you had mentioned interstate, and we're a global company with our clinical trials as well. There's got to be some way to harmonize this in a beneficial way for U.S. companies that are working internationally and across state lines. So how do you get this to a harmonized level where the policies that are working and procedures that are working are influential internationally and even across state lines? I don't know, but I think that's the question and the challenge.
And I think we're all singing from the same, song sheet here, Senator and Dr. Griffiths. All of our banks, a lot of our banks do business not only in South Dakota but across state lines. And I guess I'll cut to the chase. It's not realistic or desirable to build silos in each state. Dr. Griffiths, you mentioned that earlier. From our industry perspective, it would be more preferable to have a federal standard that would preempt a lot of these state laws so we don't have patchworks. We all kind of know, we've been dealing a lot with Uniform Commercial Code, right, Senator? In the last year or so here in South Dakota. Uniformity among the states, having a federal guidance would be, I think, very, very favorable for us.
My wife works in the financial sector, and she has some responsibility of overseeing submissions of CTRs and SARs for their organization. And the portal that's used, the BSA portal that's used for that, just came out with multi-factor authentication this week. Yeah. So I did hear the swearing come out of the home office when she was setting that up. But to that point, if there was a standard that we applied, not just for us, but for even the government itself, it's fascinating that portal contains protected information. And yet, just as recent as this week, two-factor authentication was deployed. So I would say this is a problem with the government as much as it is with the private sector, that we should say, what are the minimum standards that we should all agree to? Let's make that policy, because that is best practice.
And Senator, if I could just real quickly, my concern is with the data broker bill, really the American Privacy Rights Act of 2024 that was introduced, and it's co-sponsored and blah, blah, blah. My concern is that the optics of that is that now data privacy, we've got a data privacy bill. That's a big data broker bill. That's not what this is. Look at what the states are doing. This has nothing to do with what the states are doing. This is not this is not that. This is not consent. This is not interaction. This is not this. This is a big data broker bill. It's called the American Data Privacy Rights Act. It should be called the American Data Broker Bill Act. And because one of your original comments was this gets this started. I respect that. It does get that started, but it doesn't replace the patchwork of state laws. It's going to leave those patchwork of state laws in place because it fundamentally does something very different, sir.
Right.
But what I kind of hear, though, general consensus here is that everybody believes that there ought to be kind of one uniform set, hopefully light touch approach, but that instead of having 50 different regimes you have to comply with. Okay. All right.
Senator, if I can support that on that from the ag industry, is if you think of food security, having a federal approach is going to be absolutely important. And with the wave of data that's going to be coming in, food security is going to become a
Big deal.
Big deal.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Senator, I was just going to add, I think we've heard all the way through that there's some urgency here. The world is changing more rapidly than our process of policy development. And I know that's a dilemma for everybody who's in the legislative arena, but somehow we have to sort of get that sense of urgency. Because the technology is changing every single day. There are new capabilities that are emerging. And as we said earlier, our adversaries are putting a lot of resources into this. And it's like the war on drugs. You know, the cartels have a lot more money than typically you could put together from all the elements within the United States to fight them. And I think that's here, the acceleration of technology development is faster than anything we ever thought would happen. So.
Any just kind of closing comments, observations, thoughts before we wrap up here? Anybody want to? Anything we've missed? You think we should cover?
I would just say, I mean, we've all talked about the importance of cybersecurity and data privacy. I mean, it's an emphasis from the top down and the bottom up. I mean, you know, it's an investment. It's not expensive. You know, it's just part of doing business and needs to be an important part, whether you're a small business or the largest business. You know, it's important stuff to be dealing with these days.
That's right. But when we leave it to businesses, to your point earlier, I mean, then it's a business decision. How much risk am I willing to take? I mean, that competes with marketing, that competes with product development, it competes with everything else. That's what happens, right? And so we're going to have a hit and miss environment where, you know, risk appetites are very different and budgets are very different and all of that stuff. So done well, the thin but right piece of legislation will certainly help everybody.
Well, and I would just say that I think what kind of, at least when I was working this issue years ago, and it's hard to believe, we've been talking data privacy now at least for a decade, because when I was chairing the committee, the issues that were kind of snags were the issue of preemption and what authority state attorneys general would have versus the feds, and then and second was the private right of action and how, because that's where what you're kind of talking about, the consequences and the penalties and the punishment associated with it, and we just couldn't find the way to thread the needle, and obviously the trial lawyers have a lot of influence on that particular part of this. So, and I think that's in this legislation that was introduced here just recently, the new privacy bill. That is one of the issues too. Is that private right of action too broad? You know, and I think that's striking that balance is always going to be the challenge. But to your point, Dr. Griffiths, there is a sense of urgency around this now. I hope that there is a sense that we've got to close in and get a solution. And this is one of those issues that honestly, and there aren't many of them I would say these days that are all that bipartisan, but this should be. I mean, this has implications for so many implications from national security to the economy, and you go right down, and frankly, for that matter, just people's daily lives. So we need to get this right, and we appreciate all the insights you all have offered, and thank you for taking some time to be here, and thank you, Dr. Griffiths, and to your team here at DSU for the incredibly important role you're all playing in this field, and the many contributions you're making to cyber. You know, when you talk to the National Security Agency or other IC community, intelligence community agencies across our country right now, you see the influence that DSU is having across the country and across the world. So congratulations on that. Let us know what we can do to be good partners. And we will take what we heard today and learned today and hopefully apply it as you try and get this thing across the finish line and figure out a way once and for all to put a framework in place that hopefully is an acceptable one that accomplishes the objective in a way that doesn't crush the incredible amount of innovation that technology offers and the many, many benefits that come with that. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. And with that, we are adjourned.